Ha, and welcome back. I don't know if any of you guys was in that last mobile phone filmmaking session. If you weren't, I urge you to. That was mind blowing. If you're talking about the downturn and all the kind of challenges, I totally guarantee. But mobile phone and what you can be doing with your mobile phone at this current moment is
Mm.
absolutely insane. And the break, like he was doing this kind of budget breakdown and the kind of cost difference. Oh my, insane. So I totally recommend that you watch that. My gosh, what a joy! What a joy! We have with us the. I'm actually stop before we start for transparency. I should do this for transparency. I actually consider Miranda as my friend, right? So I really like Miranda. So I might be gassing her up a little bit too much. So just in case you I don't really like her. Like, oh my god, I got issues. I'm like, yeah, you can go for it, but I'm just letting you know that we got. Can we get some Miranda love out here? Because I'm seeing love. I was seeing love hearts going up. We kind of love you, so yeah. See, hey, it's not gonna
Thank
be any
you.
fun because you're like you're like everybody loves you, so it's not gonna be much fun. I was like trying to go hard. I don't even know that you need it. See, oh my gosh, you're that high quality. Oh God, stop it, you guys, stop,
Sam!
stop. Stop already. Oh my God. All the love already. Do you know what I mean? All these love hearts. See, you're in good company. So we're not going to give you too much of a hard time, which is not so much
Thank
fun.
you.
But no, I'm sure we'll chat it. We'll chop it up really honestly about kind of your new role. Your new role. It doesn't even feel like you need much of an introduction. Drummer, we have Miranda Wayland, the new CEO of the CDN. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm very, very well. And I'm going to do that bit because I am trying to be inclusive. So, yes, my name, as Simone said, is Miranda Wayland. My audio description, for those of you who are joining in, is that I'm a black woman with short black hair. I'm wearing glasses. I have a white dress on and some silver earrings. My pronouns are she and her.
Queen of diversity right there. Did you see what she just did? Well, what? Did you see what she just did? And like when we start meetings, we should be all like that. Like, actually, notes. Can we make notes in terms of how you start, audio description, all of that? That's great. How long have you been in the role now?
This is
How
now
long have you
my
started?
fourth week. Yes,
Wow.
it's been
So you're
exciting. Yeah.
brand new and fresh in the role. What's it been like your first kind of 4 weeks? What the kind of first 4 weeks been like?
It's been really good, actually. I have a phenomenal team. So, big shout out to my team who have been really guiding me to understand all things CDN. It's been very different to me actually sitting on the other side of the table, representing one of the broadcasters, to now leading the organization. And I'm really pleased because over the last 4 weeks, I've really got a sense of how important this organization is in terms of trying to hold the industry to account, where there's great growth and opportunity, and how we can collaborate more. I'm really excited about bringing partnerships together and us discovering solutions and ideas together collectively as opposed to perhaps CDN just doing it on its own. So yeah, I'm super, super gassed to be in this role.
Before we kind of get into it and jump into your role of CDN, and I really encourage you guys to ask as many questions as possible. So make sure you put them in chat or you put them in the question. And as always, we can we'll share the question and we can pull you up on stage. If you don't want to be on stage, just let us know. But please, this is your session. Like I said, I kind of know so I can like text her or email her at any point and ask her a question, right? So this is more about kind of making sure you have access or making sure Miranda's always approachable, but making sure that we can start that dialogue and maybe even start the conversations or start her thinking about some of the challenges that are impacting on us now. So please, I don't know, I'm not out on the cold face, right? So this is your session. So please make sure that we interact and you guys share as much as you want. I'm making before I make an assumption that most people know you on the call. I want to kind of just get a little bit more background about you and kind of get, just a little bit of understanding about you and kind of understand kind of what's inspired your journey to work in this space and this, you're being prolific in our kind of D&I space, but what started that journey and why? What kind of got you here? What's your background into this?
It's really odd, actually, how I got into the media industry because it wasn't my passion. I didn't kind of leave school or university thinking I have got to work in the creative industry. I think the closest I got to actually being interested about telly was just watching it as a viewer. I think the path to equity and inclusion really happened very early on in my life and my childhood. A quick story. So my parents are from the Caribbean, Dominica specific. So any of you that's grown up with Caribbean parents as a first generation will know how strict they are, and how determined that they were for their children to be the best that they possibly could be. And also in a culture where they were trying to assimilate their children to reduce the level of discrimination and potential racism that they experienced. And there was a time in my journey, educational wise, that I was being set up to go to a secondary school. And it was a secondary school that my mum wanted to go to, which I absolutely detest because none of my friends were going. And I was like, Mum, I want to go with my mates. So anyway, this particular school required me to fill out a scholarship form because we couldn't financially afford it. And so I sat on this exam. I looked at it and I was like, I really don't want to get in. I really don't want to get in. I acutely remember that feeling. And then I looked at the sheet and I was like, oh, I can answer most of these questions. And, did my thing, completed it. And then I was one of the first people to finish the exam. And of course I came out, Mum kissed her teeth and she went, you finished already? Go back in there and double check your work. I was like, no, Mum, I've done it. And then 2 weeks later, we got the notification that I had been unsuccessful. And now this was not acceptable for my mother because she's raised a child that she believes could fill out this form. And she went on a campaign for 3 months, every day, ringing the school, asking to see the exam results, the papers that I completed, and the answers. Because she was determined that I could not have missed or failed to complete it. Anyway, she says, as she recalls this story to me several times, that on the last day where she was going to give up because they literally were not responding to her, they contacted her and told her to come into the school. So we went into the school. She had to drag me into the school because by which time I'd already, joined another school and I was really quite happy. And they confessed to her, they said, look, Miss Wayland, the truth of the matter is that your daughter got one of the top marks. And we would have given you a position. However, the scholarship for her to get in would not have covered things like school trips, uniform, books. It was just for the admission. And you being a single parent, we felt it was in your best interest to not to put that financial burden on
Wow.
you. And so
Wow.
at that time, I really didn't care because I was loving my other school. It was amazing. I was with my friends. But I think a bit of me realized that it really didn't matter how smart I was. Other people were going to determine my outcome based on what they thought was best for me. So I think that was the first time I understood about difference. It wasn't the color of my skin, it wasn't my gender, it was my financial background that really determined what people saw about me and how I couldn't change it. And so that, and along with other different things, just made me realize, okay, I hate the injustice of it all. And it's something that I want to see if I can address. And then the media industry just happened to come along and I fell in love with it. I have a couple of disabilities and the creative industry really helps in terms of me not feeling like I can get bored quickly, and it really energizes me and really supports me in lots of different ways. So coupled the two and here I am.
Okay, your experiences working, so you've worked at BBC, you've worked across all the broadcasters and now in the streamers, right? So
Yes.
unsure, so you BBC, tell us, just give us a quick kind of
Yeah,
TV
so I
rundown,
did
yeah.
ITV for 10 years, and then I started off my journey as a project manager, then brought into the diversity, inclusion strategy and team, and then ended up leading diversity and inclusion for on-screen representation with ITV Studios. And then I was lucky enough to then move on to BBC Studios just as they broke out to create their own commercial entity. I started there for 18 months and then became a part of the wider BBC family, to which I stayed there for 5 years, leading both on and off screen diversity for the organisation. And then more recently left the BBC to join Amazon Studios and Prime Video. So got a really global overview of a commercial driving entity around entertainment. And I did that for 2 years. And then subsequently, just recently took on this role 4 weeks ago as the CEO.
Before I ask you, how do you think that experience has kind of prepared you for this role? I just want to kind of, in terms of like working on the streamer and working with the broadcasters, what differences did you notice? And also being in a global space, what differences did you notice?
Yeah, so ITV was brilliant. It's the first place that I cut my teeth in the diversity and equity space. So it really shaped my thinking and understanding. And they too are a commercial organization that really cares about mass audience appeal. So it's about making content that really derives itself to an interaction with a large group of individuals. And so the conversation there was very different to the way that we talked about making and being inclusive at the BBC. And then obviously going to Amazon, again, a much global footprint in terms of understanding the different territories. You understood very quickly the stories that we tell in the UK both have a global reach, but there are a number of countries that do not like to see inclusion. Like there are a number of countries that are not as inclusive and representative of what we take for granted in the UK and would actively speak up. And also, we have legislation in the UK that enables us to use the Equality Act to set targets, to set measurements that we can actually track and monitor. This is not universal, especially in Europe and rest of the world. So it was a very different, steep learning curve working in Amazon, not just for the company, but the exposure to a global audience that primarily is more diverse than what you would see in the UK. So on a global scale, we are the majority, not the minority. There are multiple stories from different ways of which to tell them, to different ways in which to consume it. And so to have a platform that really speaks to that was really exciting. And then obviously understanding the nuances of those audiences too.
I can see Sam's biting at the chump to kind of jump into CDM. Just give me a minute, man. I mean, I work here, man. I'm going. I'm easing up. I'm easing up there. Just just a few more questions before we get to do jump into CDN. And thank you, Sam, to start the ball rolling. Let's get more of those questions kind of coming in. Miranda, how do you think your role in all of those kind of broadcasters, streamers, has prepared you for working at the CDN, or prepared you to kind of take charge of this organization, and maybe remind people, because CDN, yeah, remind people what the CDN is and kind of what your primary objectives or role is.
Sure. So the Creative Diversity Network comprises of the pan cross industry broadcasters whose primary goal is to increase diverse representation in the UK market. And so we have a number of ways in which to do that. Most known by us is Diamond, which is our diversity monitoring form. You'll normally see that for the freelancers at the end of your production, where we ask you to provide us with diversity data, which then gives us a greater understanding of the landscape of the UK media industry. We also provide training. We work in partnerships with other organisations and industry bodies such as the TV Collective to help us really support sectors that, you know, are trying to increase representation both on and off screen. So that's what the Creative Diversity Network is. And I think my past experience, well, there's two things really. Firstly, I've been lucky enough to work for a number of the board members who make up the Creative Diversity Network. So worked within their organization. I understand their drive. I understand some of the challenges and barriers, and I also understand the language in which they use to create change. So there's some inside knowledge that I can bring to this particular role. I've also worked with some of the industry partners that sit to help us make accountable to the ambition for the organization, but also I want to bring much more closely to helping solve the solutions that we find ourselves in when we're not as equitable as we'd like to be. And then historically, I'm steeped into the diversity and equity agenda. So at every touch point, my single point of role is to make sure that in every outreach that we do, every communications that we have, every iteration of how we develop and grow as an organization, it's based in equitable representation, equity in terms of our spend, equity in terms of our relationships, equity in terms of our activity. And not to forget primarily who we're here to serve, which is a wider conversation to be had, as the Creative Diversity Network has a number of beneficiaries to its portfolio.
Okay. Before I ask Sam's question, what's your primary goal? What's your big thing that for you, what would be the definition of success in your tender?
Well, you know me well enough to know that I'm quite ambitious for a number of things. So, firstly, I think one of the things I'd like to do is really bring the sector together. I think CDN, in its journey so far, has done a phenomenal job, both with the team and the prior CEO, in terms of getting out a system which is the first of its kind that enables us to monitor and measure diversity. So I really want us to build on that success to get more of our freelancers contributing and sharing their surveys and sharing their diversity makeup with us, so we have a real accurate reflection of who's working in our industry. So more members, more partners in, including the streamers. So Amazon, I'm coming back for you, and others. I'd love to see this then replicated further outside of the UK market. I think there's, in the number of conversations I've had across the globe, a tool such as this would be beneficial. And I think that there is space for the Creative Diversity Network to be known for more than just Diamond. And I think the strength of its relationship is the partnerships in which it fosters. And I think there's lots of amazing things that we can do to really spearhead change and collaborate more effectively. So I would really love to be able to do that. And then to look to the future. And again, that's not just a CDN ambition. I think that's something that's held by the entire industry. So what potentially could that look like, and how should it best serve those who work in our sector?
Okay, I mean, that's kind of paints a rosy picture. Like, I think for some of us, the kind of CDN over the years, like you said, has become known for Dave. And I think this kind of leads really nicely to Sam's question. Sam, I'm going to invite you. I'm going to show your question and then invite you to come and join us while we read out your question. Miranda, can you see that?
I can.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So is Sam reading that out to us, or are you reading it out?
We can read it while Sam is joining. So, like me, I cannot see. Miranda, read it. I don't have my glasses. So read
Yeah.
it for me.
How do you envisage CDN expanding its data collection and analysis to include sports broadcasting as a distinctive category? Hey,
Hello,
Sam.
Miranda. Listen, I
Hello.
dressed up for you. Okay, just I'm out of my pajamas.
I love you for that, and I love that for me.
Yeah, you need to see that. So here we go. So yeah, that's my question, and I've bent your ear about this outside of this, so you know where I'm coming from.
I
So
do indeed.
now
I
you're
do
big
indeed.
CEO.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so in terms of the expansion of CDN, one of those is to expand it into the different genres. We don't we capture, but we don't report on news. There's a little bit of data capture, my understanding is, around sports, so it's how do we expand that much more broadly. And I think there's lots of different areas, including film. You know that I'm talking to Jodie, who's now moving into the publishing world. I think books has a massive influence to play in terms of, you know, the stories that we see and how equitable are those stories coming through. So there's different genres in which we need to be much more expansive in. And as I get to understand CDN a bit more and the technicalities that sit behind it, we're working on the reimagination and revamping of Diamond. So Diamond 2 is a phased rollout. So we're looking at all those different facets to make sure that we're being more expansive. So yes, I'm hoping we're going to be at a position not too long where we can actually provide data analysis around sports.
I just a slight plug here. So Black People in Sports Broadcasting, we'll be happy to help you with that because we have 65 amazing members and we're looking to expand. And data capture is a big part of what we do. So thank you so much. And once again,
what was the name of the organization again, Sam?
Black People in Sports Broadcasting. We've got a website and everything. Please look us up.
My dear, I love it. Quick plug. You do your thing, my lady. You do your thing. Please put that in chat. Can we put
Yes.
Sam, can you make sure you put the details in chat so anybody who wants to check that out or kind of find out more about that can do that? Thank you so much, Sam.
I will do. Thank you very much, ladies.
Good to see you, Sam.
Miranda, I know that you're just been in post. You know, you're quite new in post. But do you have any specific initiatives or areas of work that you're going to focus on, kind of like you want to introduce or that you're going to be introducing pretty soon?
Yes, thank you, Sim. That's really helpful. So, as I mentioned, we are redesigning and redeveloping Diamond to give us a better understanding of how we can equitably represent the freelancer market. And so, this is a massive shout out for all of you who are joining us today. We are going to be launching a survey very shortly on the back of today's announcement and our partnership with Screen Skills. The idea of the survey is for us to get some real hands-on understanding of your experience of completing Diamond, our data monitoring form. So the questions are 12 questions long. Promise you, it's not a very labor-intensive survey, but what it will do is give us greater insights about your lived experience of completing the form, where there's some pinch points, how we could be better, because primarily that information then informs the work that we do. We report annually about the diverse makeup of the creative industry, but we're conscious that we don't have as many voices represented in that reporting. So, as a first step, we really want to be able to get a sense of what that's like. So if you can complete the survey, and TV Collective have kindly agreed to support in that sharing of the survey. When it comes around, it will take you a couple of minutes. Just fill it out. We just want to know what your experience has been so we can make things much better and much more equitable for everyone.
Apart from kind of imagining or kind of evaluating I can't say it. Looking at Diamond and what you're going to do with it.
Yeah.
Are there any areas? Is there anything else that you're looking to introduce or you're thinking about or kind of focusing in, or is that the main area of focus for the moment?
That's the main thing at the moment for us, because Diamond is such an integral part of what we do. There are other things that we're also in current early discussions around in terms of what does perceived look like for us and how are we using that information for on-screen representation. Is it driving change in our industry? Are people building strategies on the back of that? So we really want to do a bit of a deep dive around that. Like I said, we have a training team. So now our new partnership with Screen Skills, who really want to solidify that and make sure that the training that we offer is equally accessible and informative to those who are using it. And then it's just the growth and expansion of the Creative Diversity Network, making sure that we're working with our industry partners and collaborating much more broadly so we get a sense of understanding what the need is and then being able to respond to it. And then hopefully creating new opportunities and new ways to hold not just the industry to account, but also to better everyone's journey.
And I was going to say, I mean, that leads me nicely in terms of collaboration with stakeholders. Who do you consider your main stakeholders? How do you collaborate? And particularly with those, I mean, obviously you've got the survey going on, but outside of that, how will you, or what are the plans to collaborate with the communities that you are here to support or represent, or who have the challenges in the first place? What are the plans around that?
Yeah, so that's one of the great growth opportunities for us, because we've never really had an ongoing conversation with freelancers. So our relationships with organizations such as yourselves and other industry partners like Film and TV, Women in Film and Television, all of those organizations will really help us to connect. But we're really keen to have a direct dialogue with people independently so they can feed into our knowledge and growth. I think there's an opportunity for us to constantly keep those lines of communications open. So I'd like to see us create quarterly or biannual moments where we're all coming together. One of the things that I'm going to be looking at is how we drive change for CDN. What's our new strategy? What's our area of focus? I don't plan to do that in isolation of our industry partners. And obviously, there will be conversations with organizations such as the TV Collective to make sure that our vision is fit for purpose and to make sure you have a voice in shaping something that is beneficial for you and your members. So yeah, I have a real ethos and drive to really create a single opportunity that CDN is reflective of the voices that sit around the industry and to represent those who often don't feel visible or feel represented within the industry overall.
Okay. And how do you? I suppose I don't know if it might be a silly question because it probably answers it in the question, but I'll give it a go anyway. How do you envisage leveraging the CDN's reach to kind of set standards or new standards for DNI, not only in our industry but kind of Europe wide, maybe even globally? How you can kind of use and leverage what you do over at CDN to set a new industry standard that what goes
That's
wider?
a really good question, because one of the first things I really want to establish is who is the CDN here for. We're
Right.
made up of broadcasters and broadcasters predominantly, and I'm hoping to open the door to streamers, but it's mainly the major broadcasters and industry bodies who finance the existence of CDN. And so primarily they get to support in terms of Diamond reporting back to them the progress that they're making against their own individual diversity strategies and targets. So we use that as an opportunity for them to see how successful they are, but also gives them an opportunity to come together to collectively create change. So there's that. So primarily CDN could just be seen as being a conduit for the broadcasters, an opportunity and a space for them to come together and talk much more broadly as one, rather than in their isolation. Obviously, we then have a conversation with production partners who then are giving us access to those who are cast and crew who are working on their shows. Again, we don't have that great of a relationship with the production partners because they can't access the data that they're providing us. So in many cases, they're actually going away and creating their own version of Diamond so they can get some real-time intelligence about the diversity of their shows. And if they gather that fast enough, maybe there is an opportunity to change the course of direction if it's not aligning with where they want to get to. And then lastly, Diamond is capturing freelancers, but we don't have a relationship with them. So I think the identity of CDN in terms of where it sits in the industry is quite clear, but who it's there to serve is sometimes misunderstood or it's not clear. So that's one of the things that I want to be really proactive about. Who are we here to serve? And in doing so, how do we aim to go about doing that? And that requires a lot of conversation and consultation for us to work out who our primary beneficiaries are and then our secondary beneficiaries. And then from there, then that will determine the question that you've asked me. Are we here to set a standard for the industry, if that's what CDN is designed to do? Do we help facilitate some basic standard for change? And how broadly does that go? But the number one question is, who is CDN here to serve?
I think it's an imperative and important question, and to ensure that we're all clear, so that we're all clear about what we go to CDN and how we engage. You mentioned when you were just talking then that the production sector are kind of looking at ways that they can capture that data. Firstly, why is the data not shared with production companies? That's really interesting to me.
So the parameters and the legal parameters that were set up when CDN and Diamond was first designed did not give us the opportunity to be able to share back the Diamond data. So the way that it works is the broadcasters will acquire a production company to commission a program. Through that commission, then the production company will own the relationship with the freelancers, and they trigger through their own system, through a system obtained through us, the Diamond forms to which freelancers complete. The way that we needed to create the autonomy and independence for data GDPR meant that we couldn't see the granular data. We can only ever see the overarching top line figures. So we can run reports, but we don't get it on a program by program level.
Right.
So that information comes directly from broadcasters to the production companies. They own the relationship, they own that data, and we only get the top over anonymized data coming back.
Well, yeah, okay, I suppose. So you're having, because one would assume that there are reason of having that data, so you can kind of see where the challenges are, the issues are, that you get an overarching, but like having more kind of relationship or a more deeper conversation about accessing that data, I think would be useful for all of us to kind of see where the programs are doing really well and where there's areas where they could be helped. And maybe that's why it's not. It's not really. As I thought about it, I was like, maybe that's not quite why it's readily available. Could cause.
I can absolutely see why people would love to see how one show is doing compared to another. I definitely see that, but obviously there are sensibilities that sit behind that. So we would definitely be going in a big consultation phase about what does that really look like when presented in that way. Actually, are we safeguarding our freelancers by having a particular show and then all that data being visible? And if it's a small show, we have measurements for redaction. So you have to hit a threshold So there might be a few shows that you just won't be able to get that information coming through. But as a starting point, I would like at least CDN to have access to that, so that we can at least then work in partnership with the production companies and all the broadcasters to look at ways for improvement, and then find ways that we would report it back out.
Wonderful. Do you think there's a need for more transparency around kind of D&I issues and the kind of, the relationships and all the kind of things that is there a need, or do you think that we're kind of quite good at sharing what's going on? Because like even that idea that you've got data, I kind of understand it on a, that you want to protect freelancers. If there's a show and there's only one person, we will all know who that one person is, right? So we've got to be those kind of levels. But just in terms of kind of transparency, do you think that there's been enough transparency thus far in terms of how we deal with some of these challenges?
I think so. There's a level of transparency that I see in the UK that I've never seen in a global market, just because they don't capture data anyway. My question probably, and it's going to sound like I'm dodging the question, I really am not, Sam, I promise you that. But even if you just go by what the broadcasters report independently, coupled with what Ofcom report, coupled with what we report, there is a lot of reporting about diversity inclusion within the sector anyway. What I would like to see is greater action on the back of the data we already have, so that if more transparency does become available, it's not just for transparency's sake, it actually drives change. So our reporting has shown a lack of gender representation in senior roles, and most of our gender representation is sitting in heads of production. This is information that's available. We're seeing still a lack of gender representation in writers and producers and directors. But this is not new. We know that ethnic minority groups are not as prominent and in terms of the UK census in the way that we'd like it to be. Again, this is not new information for us. So what CDN can do is ask the broadcasters much more closely, what are we doing to create the space for this to change? And then if it is a collective approach, then who do we need around the table to make that happen? That's the kind of dialogue I'm hoping to have with the board, much more closely and clearly, and also to make sure that the interventions they're putting in place are not just one-offs, but they're sustainable and they actually create the impacts that they're expecting to create. That's the power of what CDN is having those board members collectively together, where I can ask those difficult questions. This has been like this for X amount of years. What are we doing about it? And why is it still outstanding in the way that it is?
Okay, and I think that, like you said, the starting point, and I think it's an important starting point for all in the industry, is defining what CDN is or who it serves. And once that piece, how long do you reckon that piece of work will take? Since when will we understand what CDN does and who it serves?
Well, the team have been doing a bit of that just before I got here, so a huge thanks to them as well. But it's something that I don't want to rush. I'm hoping that I can get around to bringing individual one-to-ones and then collective subgroups together. Maybe this is something you can help me be held accountable for. I'd like to say that I've got halfway through those conversations by the tail end of the year, beginning of the year. So we start the first quarter coming out to say, look, we've done the analysis, we've spoken to everybody that we feel is really important to our journey, and this is how we are defining ourselves.
Okay, so guys, get your calendars out, save the date. March, we're expecting a whole full This Is CDN, right? March, right? So put it in your diary, save the day. What changes have you seen? Because obviously from when you first started, and even probably possibly working at Amazon, the industry looks a lot different. What are the kind of major changes, particularly around the conversations around D&I?
Yeah, it's no great surprise the economic climate that we're in is having a huge knock-on effect, not just from those who have been able to sustain their careers and their livelihoods in the industry, but the conversation about diversity in a number of roles that we're seeing either disappearing or evolving into other different types of roles have been very poignant for us at the moment. And so there is this current void, I feel, that the conversation about inclusion and representation needs to be had on a global scale, because everybody's fighting to keep their existing companies going, making sure that people can work and that our industry is running. Parallel to that is really important that we don't lose sight about the lack of representation, both from an audience perspective, but also from those working in our sector and the stories that we tell. So with depleting budgets, tariffs, changes in the way that the industry is going just to sustain itself, not too dissimilar to what we saw pre-COVID and post-COVID, that's where I worry, is that we end up slipping back into that space where actually we default to using the same production companies and partnerships and relationships. And those who are from historically excluded groups aren't often utilized in the way that they are. So that's what I worry about. Those are the conversations that we're having at CDN and with all my diversity counterparts. We're very mindful that this is a challenging time. It has a huge knock-on effect on people's mental well-being. The fantastic work that Marcus is doing with the film and TV charity, and the real impact trying to find financial support that's available. Broadcasters are looking at ways in which they can sustain the industry. But we need to remember that the people are at the heart of every program that we make, and those voices need to be equitable and representative. And that's what I want us to keep a mindful eye on as we run the day-to-day business of running the creative industry.
Kind of two questions. I think that number one, do you think what we're seeing in the industry is a temporary blip? So, are we going to get back to normal? And what does normal look like? And when? Miranda, we want even the date. We get our calendars out again and put in a note when the industry's going to get back to normal as well. So, from where you sit.
I never think there is ever a normal. That's the whole point of working in the creative industry, that we're always reimagining what a new normal is based on whatever crisis we're having to endure from a social perspective, or whether or not it's an economic perspective, and actually how people ultimately want to consume content. So I don't think we ever get a new normal. I don't think we ever sustain the normal. I think we're always reimagining what that new normal is. Again, I think the digital space is hugely impactful in the way that we're consuming content, but also the way that we're creating content. The streamers are really actively looking at how do you come to them for all of your media entertainment. So I know when I left Amazon, that was a big drive for them. How does Prime Video become the single source of entertainment, so that you would only ever go and source your content through them? And that's generally how most people are working. Most of the broadcasters are street. How do you get eyes onto our content and you hold them there for longer? So everything that sits around it in terms of the marketing, the schedule, the distribution, everything that sits around ensuring that you and I as audiences are glued to their content and keeping us engaged and innovated is the number one focus. Now, the stories that are told, now that's the thing that we really want to be thinking about. And where are those stories coming and who are telling those stories continues to be the ongoing thing that we need to keep our eyes on as we continue to drive audience share.
I think that when you left Amazon, and possibly when Joe left the BBC, it kind of triggered a concern that D&I is kind of falling off the agenda. And I think that there's been headlines coming out of the States where of roles and so on and so forth. Do you think the case, or maybe falling off the agenda might be too harsh, but has there been a change in the D&I conversation, particularly since you've been around? What are those changes, those main changes been?
They've been huge sways. Like when I first started my career in the journey, you could only ever talk about diversity and inclusion in quiet corners, in a little huddle. Do you know what I mean? You literally had to fight to have the conversation be made as part of the ongoing narrative that was talked about when it talked about content. And then move forward, then it always felt like it was a bolt on, because we were actually begging people to find things in their heart, to be able to think about others. So it was much more of an emotional pull. We've now morphed into it being critical to your bottom line. Actually, if you're looking to attract a wider audience base that is as diverse as any audience that you've ever seen, and if you're thinking about young audiences, all broadcasters and streamers are primarily looking to grow their next generation of audiences. So those 16 to 25-year-olds who are by very nature diverse in their makeup and their habits and their interests, they're trying to find ways in which to get them brand loyal to their content, or at least come to them for certain points. And we understand that young people are consuming content completely different to the way that, you know, they're showing up for one thing and then disappearing for another. So, you know, from a streamer's point of view, how do we get them to pay the subscription fee if they're only ever dipping out for one or two shows? No one's going to want to pay that. And broadcasters, especially the BBC, again, making sure that people understood from the license fee that they have a lot more to offer than you actually think in terms of just the one thing, which is TV and perhaps radio. So I think the conversation about diversity has evolved as society's changed, and we've had loads of different things in my own lifetime, whether it's been the Me Too movement, the killing of George Floyd, whether it's been about, you know, female representation, women representation on boards, all these societal conversations, socioeconomic backgrounds, and those from socioeconomic backgrounds have constantly now become a part of our narrative. We're talking about the transgender agenda. These are all things that we weren't talking about 5-8 years ago when I first started in the industry. So I think the cultural shift in society has meant that more people want their voices to be heard. The spending power and where they spend their money, much more in control. People are making decisions left, right, and center based on their economic situation as to, are they going to have Amazon and Netflix, or are they going to just have the one? They're also now asking more of their entertainment platform. And there's also opportunities for you to be sharing content, and whether or not that's through YouTube or actually the way that we're looking at content completely different. So your new normal is different. The conversations that we're having around diversity is really different. And I no longer feel like I have to apologize for bringing those conversations to the foreground. I feel powerful and strong enough, even before I got to this point, to be able to call out the injustice in the way that we were making our shows, or the people that we were predominantly overusing to make our content. And I think most of us are feeling much more confident now to be able to challenge back. The difference is I'm very fortunate to sit in a CEO position where actually my role is quite secure, it's consistent. I think for freelancers, we still have a climate where you speak up and you worry about what's going to happen in your next gig. And that's something our audiences don't have any mindsight about. If the audiences is the bottom line, I think we're also very mindful that speaking out can also alienate you and other you in ways that you have already experienced as a human being before you even set foot on any production. So the landscape continues to be more tenuous, I think, and especially in this economic climate, people are not going to not probably feeling more confident to speak up about any injustice or discrimination that they face because they need the gig. Very different when the industry is, you know, full up of productions happening left, right, and center. You might be more inclined to speak up. So I think people's mental well-being is being much more compromised. And again, the power of CDN is being able to raise that with our board, who are very much often removed from that lived experience, reminding them why we're here, reminding them about the temperature check of what's going on, and actually are our efforts combating that? And if not, who do we partner with to be able to address it?
Over the summer, obviously, we saw some really horrific and scary scenes with kind of race riots, but also equally some really beautiful scenes as communities kind of stood up and said, we're not having it. But what I think, and I've heard comment, what was quite lacking was the kind of industry response, or the wider industry response to that. Do you think that kind of, I don't know if that's a change in the wind. Do you think that might have fueled the importance for this conversation, or that everybody's just a little bit over it? We've been talking about this for so long. How do you think those because that was kind of, you know, I think we all felt we'd moved on from a certain point, but to see those kind of horrific images of people being dragged out of their cars because they thought they were being immigrants and stuff like that kind of puts us right back, or puts the focus on where we are and where we live in, and some of the challenges that we still yet to face. Firstly, what did you think about the industry's response during that time? Let me do that in two parts. So what did you think about the industry's response to the troubles that we saw over the summer?
So I have to say that I felt that maybe there needed to be more of a recognition and understanding about what happened during that time. I know individual broadcasters and companies would have communicated to their employees. to let them know about safeguarding, and that they are appalled by what they're seeing happening in society today. To your point, was that as widely felt across the freelance community from our industry? Probably not. And if there is one or two people who didn't feel that the industry put its arms around them and made them feel more secure, then that's a failing on all of us. So I think any time where we see situations such as those taking place, it is incumbent on us to make sure that everybody understands that we are here to support in times of trouble, and we should be extending our love and support for those most impacted. So
I mean,
I don't think we
yeah,
can
but I
never
think it
not
goes
do
beyond
enough.
that. Sorry, so you think that we
I think there's
that
always
go
more that
beyond
we
that, because I
can,
think
yeah, we can
there
always
is an
do more.
understanding. Yeah, there's an understanding that obviously what fueled a lot of those violences was representation, right? Or lack of, or the types of representation. Is that become like a big focal point, or has that shifted maybe the attentions in terms of what's happening? Because obviously the representations, the stories of certain communities, that something like that could happen, and people automatically assume a community is like that comes down solely to what we put on screens and in our media. We're all responsible for that. But as that kind of focused the conversation, you think, into kind of thinking even more about representation? We had a conversation with Marcus, and I'm going to do like Sam did. I'm going to do a quick plug. Look, check out the the podcast, because our first episode was all around race, rights, and representation. But he spoke about the kind of representations of individuals rather than communities, and that being part of the challenge. Have those conversations been brought back on the table in terms of what we're doing around representation, and how better we can address that?
Yeah, those conversations are happening, and I think moments in time such as this gets people to reevaluate what have they done and what can they do better. So, yeah, again, there have been some horrific things that have happened in our time where those moments always happen, and it's human nature. And then it's obviously good business practice for you to go, actually, are we taking our foot off the accelerator on this one, and what more needs to be done, and how do we quantify it? I think in terms of what we saw in the riot, sadly, I live in a lifetime where this is not the first time we've seen this type of display in society. So whether or not I've become slightly desensitized around it or not, you kind of go, oh God, here we go again. That's the gut feeling I have. And then the immediate reaction is, are my children safe, and all the people that I love and care for? And I think that's how most of us looked at it. For those generation who haven't seen it on that scale before, absolutely. My kids were like, oh my God, is this what's going on? It doesn't make sense for a world where we talk about being understanding of each other, and there being equity, and everybody feeling that this country belongs to them. Sadly, I'm very aware that time and time again, this country makes clear that people like me aren't often welcomed. And so when there is an outpour of that, I am never surprised by that human behavior in society, because we live in a country that doesn't often back and support us in the way that we need to be backed and support for some of these things not to happen. And even the riots itself, when it became acutely aware that the person that, the individuals they were targeting was not representative of the person who committed the crimes, we still continue to see the riots overtake. So we have to be really mindful of the country that we live in, and as much progression that we do in the media industry, you always have pockets of individuals who are not going to be aligned with our vision, and they're not going to be embracing of change. That being
No,
said,
totally.
we don't then pander to the ignorance of others through the stories that we tell. That is a point of view that we don't align with, and across the sector we need to ensure that we continue to double down on equitable representation. That's where the authenticity is absolutely paramount. Then we are making sure that we are not living, and we are only ever demonstrating trauma from each community group. Black trauma sells, but it's not the only trauma that the Black community know about. And so for the narratives have to be much more broader to what we are educating our audiences, so that their understanding of different communities that are not of their own are much more broader than the knowledge that they may have acquired in their own personal life.
No, I hear that. And I totally agree. I think that maybe what I was trying to get to is that when George Floyd moment happened and we had all the black squares, there was a kind of injection in terms of the space and the challenges. It just didn't feel like that at all. It just kind of happened and then kind of disappeared in terms of the industry's response. And having worked with other industries or kind of been in communication, there was more of a kind of proactive, we're going to do something about this. We recognize that there's a challenge here, or we recognize that the challenge still exists and it still hasn't gone away maybe as far as we thought. So we're going to inject some focus into it. Why? Or it was just interesting, not intrigued. I was interested that it didn't happen in that way in the industry. It just kind of seemed to have passed us by quite quietly, and it's all back to business as normal. But that might be just where I'm sitting rather than a real truth. Have we got any questions? We've got a few comments. Sam, I'll share some of the comments that we've got. Yeah, just talking about action, the importance of action. Serena, I'll just share a few of these comments. Serena was talking about the importance of action. I think when you're talking about when you know wanting to make sure that whatever you do is really actionable and can make change, and we see the importance of action. Sam was, I think, Sam, I'm with you as well. No, I think I'm one of the only ones that still pay. The other day we had a session and they were talking about streaming, and the gentleman was saying, does anybody, making a joke, does anybody pay for Apple TV? And I was so embarrassed because I do. I think I'm the only person in the world that I do. Do you know what I mean? And so in terms of kind of, so you're in a new post. It's interesting. The work that you're about to do is kind of defining the role of the CDN and kind of what you think you can do. Given the changes and what's happening at this moment, what kind of would you like to see? What changes on a kind of more personal, not necessarily as the head of the CDN, but what would you like the industry to look like in the next 2 or 3 years? What are for you, the kind of bigger, kind of more utopia vibes? Not necessarily that big, but the kind of like, what are the kind of bigger goals that you'd like us to see us to move to? Do you know what I mean, in terms of the industry?
Yeah, I think there's so many different things that I would love to see happen in my lifetime, in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. I think an honest conversation, which I'd love us to be able to have, is a way in which we manage the frustration for us as a community. Look, doing this particular work, looking at diversity, inclusion, and equity in whatever space you're doing it, whether it's for a broadcaster, it's one of our indie partners, whether or not you're doing in isolation on your own, or it's a part of, tagged onto your job. It's a very challenging and difficult job. And it takes a lot from you to be able to support your organization, but also to support others who are going through difficult things. So I think the conversation about how we see diversity and equity in the creative industry slightly needs to change, because I think often we see it as if one organization sets out their strategy and they achieve it in 3 years, the holy grail is done. We've achieved utopia. That's not the case, which is why we're always frustrated that when people do end up writing their D&I strategies and we get to the end of that tenure, things don't necessarily feel the same or as what was expected. So I think we really need to understand that this is a continuous of an organic conversation, in the same way that we as human beings are evolving and changing. What was good for me in my 20s is slightly different to me in my 30s, and now I'm hitting the menopause is a completely different kind of conversation and world event. We need to get to the core of what's blocking the change that we as the industry want to see. And I mean, those that sit around the CDN board are also a part of that conversation in terms of why is it we're not achieving at the rate and pace that we want to achieve, considering that those sitting around the table hold the power. The majority of the power comes through them. So it's that honest kind of conversation about what really is the blocker to why we're not seeing change, and how quickly can we remove it, or how quickly can we start to disseminate it. There's the support that we need to give our freelancers to endure this economic climate, but also what happens on the back end, to your point, when we climb out of the situation that we're in and the industry is a bit more stable. How do we make sure that the talent is there to then take up the roles that are available, and they haven't gone off to seek employment elsewhere because they couldn't ride out the storm? So I'd love to be able to, like I said, there's partnerships I want to be able to manifest and bring together that strengthens CDN and strengthens the power of what we hope to achieve. I think there's some really honest conversations that I want to have with the board about how do we make them accountable and how do we actually remove some of the barriers that may have been done, you know, unintentionally in their tenure, but is really stopping us from making a collective change in the way that we want to, and also trying to get in front of what we think the future will be so that we can safeguard the next generation coming up. All of us working in our industry know that the next generation need to have a better experience than what some of us might have had. So how do we create the path for that to happen?
No, definitely. And just kind of like before we wrap, and like obviously I'm gonna take some flowers and assume that I've done a good like nobody ain't asking no questions. So they others clearly just enjoy us chat talking and
I'm all right with
having a
that,
chat
you
and
know.
like they're getting stuff right. Like, you know, but seriously, I mean obviously if you guys do, if questions do come up and you do feel that you want to reach out to Miranda, I'm going to make the assumption that you are quite approachable and people can, do you know what I mean? They can email you and continue the conversation. Just one thing for me, and I think that's one of the things that always boggles me, and I know that there's a few other diversity experts or specialists in. How do you, as a Black woman, manage it? Like, how do you find that balance? Because it's like obviously, oftentimes you're kind of working in environments like so. We understand that sometimes these environments are quite hostile to the community as wide, right? But you're there, kind of representing them, trying to fight back the community, trying to how do you kind of look after you? How does it, you know, I speak to a lot of diversity ways, and obviously your situation is quite different because you're, you know, CEO, you're at the head of an organization, so you have a certain amount of autonomy and voice and you can be heard. But how do you manage that? Because it must be quite challenging to be in a space where you understand some of the challenges that you're firsthand that you're trying to defend, but also have to defend the organization. How do you address that balance? How do you navigate through all? Yeah, give us some advice. How do we get through? You know what I mean?
I haven't always been that good at it, to be honest with you, Sim, and you know me well enough to know that there have been times where it has weighed heavy on me and I haven't really been able to find peace or reconcile with it. To your point, most of us who do this type of work either have an element of diversity within us that, you know, we're trying to make sure that it's equitable for everyone else. You sit with other people's stories and other people's traumas, and you're also trying to create the space for them to feel capable to move on or to get additional support and help once they've raised it with you. So, you know, I'm very, very blessed to have people around me who actually care, that know me well enough to know that when my persona or personality or I suddenly disappear for copious amounts of time, that there's something going on, and they'll actively keep calling or reaching out to me to make sure that I'm okay. And sometimes, you know, it's difficult to even articulate the burden that you feel and the pressure that you feel, because every time, so for me as a Black woman with 2 types of disability, every time I see the lack of progress in those 3 areas specifically, I know it's about me. I know there's a part of me that the industry doesn't want. There's a part of me that the industry isn't working hard enough to make it equitable. So I feel othered, and it's very hard to disconnect that feeling in a role that you're doing to try and create space and equity for others.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, you know, and notwithstanding the fact that I don't have other protected characteristics to which I champion, it's about the feeling of feeling excluded. It's about the feeling of trying to be heard and to be seen. I try very hard not to now feel grateful for any opportunity. I've actually worked hard, but I spent my whole career going, oh, thank you so much. You won't regret it. I'll work hard for you. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of like, and that's that you get to a point where you're just so grateful for any opportunity because you know how much hard work has gone to you just being there. So I'm trying to stand in my own brilliance and go, no, actually, you don't have to be grateful for that because you earned it. You earned it the minute you showed up. You have to accept that it's okay not to know everything, because I came up from an era where you were expected to work twice as hard as everyone else and to be a master of none. Like, you can't let anybody be better than you. So I think the love and support that I have from family and friends, trying to take a little bit downtime, I try and practice it every day. Sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, but I know that I have to come first.
Yeah, so you're kind of very clear about putting self-management. And just, I think this is more a comment from me, rather than a question. But I just wanted to remind the industry, and particularly as we kind of evolved as a community, that, you know, the idea of a black man means so many different things. Like even a Nigerian man can come from a tribe. That's like, I don't know how many tribes are in Nigeria, but I know that there's more than one, right? So just kind of when we're looking at diversity, and even like you said, similar to me, I have, you know, I don't believe I have neurodiversity. People who work with me suggest I do. So you know what I mean. But I'm like the idea that you can have a disability, you can be a woman, you can intersectionality, so that we're seeing them as more rounded humans rather than these little boxes. People often having to choose whether I'm disabled today or whether I'm black. So maybe space where we are looking at people more rounded. It would be lovely to see
Yes.
how you're gonna bring that work into what we're doing, because it's important as the communities evolve. Anyway, that was my final thought. Thank you so much, Miranda. That has been amazing. I think that the comment that I suppose that what we just heard is that we just love kind of just listening to you guys talk. So, you know what I mean? It was kind of cool. You really done it. Be very, like, I think that this is a lovely one to yeah, you really did earn it. Very grateful.
Thank you, Serena.
You know what I mean? I think that that's kind of, I think that echoes the sentiments of most of us. And we're not meant to love you so much because we're meant to kind of give you a little bit of challenge. So we're going to get back into that space. So we're still going to beat you up a little bit. But no, beating up, but with the most love and most respect. But we will surely always hold you to account and keep your feet to the fire, because that's important that we do that. But you know what I mean? Thank you, sis. Personally, I give thanks for you support from day. But thank you for being here and kind of sharing your wisdom.